It was great last night. Senator Rick Santorum submitting his credentials to replace the incompetent in the White House. Governor Rick Perry dropping some pretty heavy hints that he might bid for the same honor. I don't know. I don't think that he wanted you to text him the word forward because you were applying to play forward at Texas A&M basketball. And then there was that ringer claiming to be Sarah Palin. I believe she's still around today. We've got security looking for her. I would just say, though, after last evening, you ain't seen nothing yet. Lots of people made that phrase famous, but I always attribute it to our great hero, President Ronald Reagan. And in fact, I wanted to explain, some of you have asked me why your name badge has on it a blue ribbon that says Camp Reagan. Some of you are in on the secret, but just so that everybody is, and in fact, I think there are extra ribbons out there. If you want one, go to the registration desk. We decided to have some fun as we sought to make sure that Marriott hotel accommodations were provided to anyone that would want to make a weekend of it, and so we decided to call this Camp Reagan. In case you missed the memo, there was a little bonfire last night in the mezzanine section of the hotel. The s'mores were great, they tell me. I'm afraid that we'll be paying extra damages for that little experiment, but I do hope all of you at Camp Reagan found your bunk beds comfortable. You remembered your mosquito netting. I hope no bears molested your tent last night here at Camp Reagan. Great media coverage last night. CNN, Fox, ABC, NBC all took note of Western Conservative Summit auditioning for the next President of the United States. National Review magazine, their online blog, the primary event is covering us. A new magazine that I'm kind of excited about called Tea Party Review is here. Look for their table outside. They not only have a copy of the magazine for you, but they are live streaming the summit on the web. They tell me if you stop by their table, you may even get yourself interviewed on the live stream coverage of Western Conservative Summit. We, of course, are live streaming most all of the television that you can see on the big screens out through the CCU and Centennial Institute website. And those who are watching us that way today, thank you all so much for being with us. Why don't we give a hand for those who are watching online? As conservatives, we're constantly struggling to maintain tradition, and you know it's not easy. You feel your grip slipping sometimes. There was a time when out west never was heard a discouraging word. But if you happen to pick up this morning's Denver Post, you see that the discouraging word ban has been violated. Nice headline, great picture of Rick Perry inside. But for some reason, the second sentence in the lead of the story says that summit goers were heard grumbling as they exited the room after Perry's speech. I just want you to know that we have spies. We know who was grumbling. You folks will be doing the dishes while the rest of us here at Camp Reagan are out on a horseback ride with Foster Freeze. I promised you more of Legacy Quartet. Let's get things off to the right kind of beginning with Legacy.
President Ronald Reagan once said, if this nation ever ceases to be a nation under God, it will become a nation gone under.
Half a century ago, 2 simple words declared true planted in our hearts. And every time the flag is raised, we've been honored to repeat the phrase, so the world will know we are under God. America's been blessed under God, brought through every trial and test. We are sheltered by the mercy He chose to give in privilege and abundance. This nation lives under God. Freedom has survived under God. We need to recognize we're dependent on His goodness, indebted to His care, maybe more than many people, anytime or anywhere. Still our only hope and prayer is under God. When we pledge allegiance now, it's under God. These words have shaped this land that we hold dear. Though some insist it's not allowed to acknowledge that we need Him now, it has never been so clear that under God, America's been blessed under God, brought through every trial and test. We are sheltered by the mercy He chose to give in privilege and abundance. This nation lives under God. Freedom has survived under God. We need to recognize we're dependent on His goodness, indebted to His care, maybe more than many people, anytime or anywhere. Still our only hope and prayer. Under God, freedom has survived under God. We need to recognize we're dependent on His goodness, indebted to His care, maybe more than any people, anytime or anywhere. Still our only hope and prayer. Still our only hope and prayer. It's under God. Under
Legacy Quartet. I needed a little coaching on the name of the newest voice up here. From your right, it's Doug. I'm sorry, my right, your left. Always been challenged on that. From your left, it's Doug, Blake, Steve Taylor, our Dean of Music at Colorado Christian University. On your right, the basso profundo that you just envy, deeper than the federal deficit, Norm Huxman. I love them all, but I would just kill for that bass that Norm has, and I was asking him about it, and he said, "John, stick to whispering." We've been on our feet, and the song well deserved it. As we now have our invocation, please remain seated because in order for him to be visible on television, I've lost him right here in front of me. Our invocation will be by Colorado Christian University 2010 graduate with a degree in global studies from Aurora, Colorado, my good friend David Kimmig. David, since graduating, has done a stint working as a staffer for the Republican caucus at the Colorado State Senate. He now works for a terrific advocacy group at the state capitol called the Christian Family Alliance of Colorado. I got to know Dave Kimmig when he was part of 16 students and 4 faculty on the first CCU Washington Week that occurred in 2009. This has become an annual May event. All of us on the 2009 Washington Week trip were constantly out of breath, trotting along trying to keep up with Dave Kimmig and his flying wheels. David Kimmig for the invocation, please.
Dear Lord, thank you for this day, and thank you that we could all be here and have the opportunity to hear from all these wonderful speakers today and learn how we can further influence society with our conservative values. And Lord, I offer up these 2 lines from a stanza in Francis Scott Key's poem, The Defense of Fort McHenry, as a prayer and a reminder. Blessed be the land, or blessed with victory and peace, may the heaven rescued land praise the power that hath made and preserved us a nation. Lord, you did create and have preserved the United States of America. And even the founders knew that neither of these would have been possible if you have not intervened. So during this time of great trial for our country and trouble, I pray, Lord, that you would guide her, that you'd guide her in your ways, and that her people would turn from their ways and honor you, in order that you would continue to preserve this great nation. And Lord, when those things are done, then the star-spangled banner in triumph shall wave over the land of the free and the home of the brave. Amen.
Dave Kimmig, thank you very much. And now to honor our flag, let me introduce a current CCU student and another one of our ROTC cadets from Colorado Christian University. This is Jacob DeLargy. He's a junior majoring in history. He is from Highlands Ranch and was a key player in last year's summit, a great contributor to all that we do at Centennial Institute throughout the school year. Jacob DeLargy for the colors, please.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We have a great, great day coming up. But what on earth is going on in Washington, D.C.? From Rick Perry and Rick Santorum last night, we had some challenging thoughts about what ought to be going on, how they would like to see things different. But someone who has observed this with a discerning eye, but always a touch of wit and humor, for a number of years now, writing, broadcasting, and most recently pioneering in the new area of online coverage of news and public affairs and commentary about those things, will get us started this morning. Lots of us know Tucker Carlson from when he was upholding the conservative, loyal opposition side on broadcast outlets like CNN, MSNBC, PBS. Now we often see him, moreover, on our side of the divide on Fox News. He's written a book called Politics, Partisans, and Parasites, My Adventures in Cable News. Parasites. I want to hear more about parasites. Tucker, could you please take care of that for us? But the adventure that he's on now is such an important one. And I guess it could be symbolized by the fact that when some of us got up this morning, we wanted to know what the Denver Post, our local paper, one surviving local paper, had to say about last night's summit dinner. So if you were of the Bill Armstrong vintage, you went looking for that print newspaper, and I have Bill to thank that he found the print newspaper. Now, the fact that it was hard to find tells you something. I'm not that much younger than Bill, but I was able to tell him, gosh, Bill, thanks, I already read it on my laptop in my room. But then I got down and I asked my CCU student colleagues, and they said, gosh, John, we already read it on our smartphone in our pocket. It's only a matter of time till this is all on a microchip in your forehead, friends. The Daily Caller is an important entry in the online conversation. Tucker Carlson and his colleague Neil Patel, an alumnus of the Dick Cheney vice presidential staff, got the Daily Caller started in the best free enterprise tradition as a new venture in 2010. They're gaining all the time in prominence on the web. Be sure to stop by on the table outside at the foot of the escalators and get some Daily Caller paraphernalia. Tucker shamelessly wants you to help him advertise. You're going to greatly enjoy the Washington Report from today's lead speaker. Please welcome Tucker Carlson.
Thank you, John. I would say the Daily Caller polo shirts are not only intensely fashionable, but also very handsome and free. So please do get one. And thank you very much for having me. I'm honored to be here. I can't remember the last time I was in a room full of so many people I agree with. It's almost bewildering. I live in Washington, so this is not an experience. A city that voted 94% for Obama, so it's not an experience I have very often. And I'm especially honored to be preceding Foster Friess, who's in the audience, who's one of my favorite people, who's been a mentor to my partner and me, one of the smartest, literally one of the funniest people I've ever met. So I envy you. Many of you are going to be hearing him for the first time. And just to be around so many smart people who are on the right side. I was asked two things today by John. One was to be brief. As a cable news viewer, he knows that I'm verbose. I can go on forever. Literally, once I start going, it's almost impossible to stop me, so I'm going to keep the time very much in mind. And I'm going to, by the way, open it up for questions at the end. But in the meantime, if you disagree with anything I say, don't wait. Shout out. Most people hate to be heckled as they speak, but after many years of working across from James Carville, it's not like you're going to hurt my feelings because I don't have any at this point. So if there's anything that that you think is wrong, again, throw a mint, toss a croissant my way, go crazy. And the second thing I was asked was to speak on what to expect from Congress. And I was thinking about this in the shower this morning. I don't mean to be glib, but I mean this actually with all sincerity. The answer is very short. A whole lot more than you're getting, I guess, would be to expect from Congress. And I'll give you an update since I was in Washington yesterday, and I've kept pretty close track with our many reporters who are on Capitol Hill following the drama. By the way, viewership of reality programs has just dropped off dramatically in D.C. since we have our own now. It's like Jersey Shore, except less intelligible. But I will tell you what's going on really quickly, but let me just sum up. I think the problem with Congress, in a phrase actually from our former president, President Bush, who described a phenomenon he called the soft bigotry of low expectations. And that is what I think Congress suffers from. And I think those low expectations, and I say this with sorrow, often come from conservatives. And you heard that I worked on MSNBC. I want to be completely clear. I own my own shooting range, okay? That's how right-wing I am, just so you know. And I mean that with total sincerity, and getting more so every year. I mean, I'm literally this close to moving to Idaho and stockpiling weapons and food. I mean, I am really... In fact, you're welcome to join me in my compound in Coeur d'Alene after this, if you like. So I say this not as one of these self-described conservatives who, wants to bring a little moderation. Why can't we be more reasonable? I'm not from the reasonable caucus at all, just so you know. So consider my words in light of that. Ask my wife how conservative I am. But conservatives, nevertheless, are, I think, part of the problem, or they abet the problem. Their low expectations allow results that fall so far short of the mark that it's shocking the more you know about it. And the truth is, most people don't know much about it because the coverage of what actually happens in Congress is pretty much limited to the horse race and to the horse trading, right? So pick up any paper that's covering this, which is pretty much all of them, the conventional newspapers, and you'll find stories about, which side is able to invoke cloture, how many votes are needed, what's likely to happen tomorrow in the negotiations, all of which I guess is interesting and it's significant as far as it goes, but these are not details history will record 100 years from now because ultimately they're not significant. What is significant is the substance of the legislation being put forward, and that gets very, very little ink. And there are a number of reasons for this. The most obvious is most reporters are pretty shallow. And another reason is they're not interested in policy, and a third reason is they've got their thumb on the scale. And you know that, I'm not going to belabor the point in front of an audience that already thinks the media are liberal, except to say that they're more liberal than you think they are. That's true. I've spent my entire life in this. I grew up in it. My father worked in this business. I've never done anything else. I'm totally unqualified to do anything else. And the one thing I have learned in 42 years in and around the media is they are truly rooting for the other side. And that has become truer, I think, as I have gotten older, and it has become truest of all during this present administration. The press loves Barack Obama. And they get annoyed with him, as you do with loved ones. But make no mistake, at the core of the relationship is love, And not just conventional love. By love, I don't mean affection. I don't mean the kind of love you feel for the Yankees. That's a platonic kind of love. I'm talking about another species of love. I'm talking about the kind of love that you really have to be a 14-year-old boy to understand, a kind of red-in-the-face, florid love, just truly a yearning love. And that is the love the press feels for Barack Obama. And it's evident in their coverage up and down, I would say, and particularly in moments like this. And it's a shame because essential details get lost. Let me name a few. I've been living through this maelstrom in Washington having to do with what we call the Boehner Plan, and that is, of course, the majority Republican option that was passed in the House and killed by the Senate. In the much coverage of this, there was basically just one storyline, and that was the right-wing Republican Party is trying to force through their right-wing version of what the budget ought to be, but they are being stopped by the ultra-right-wing, the crazed, Taliban-inspired Tea Party wing of the Republican Party. Those basically terrorists, that's exactly right. Those 87 freshmen who, beholden to no one but their own diseased visions of the theocracy they are hoping to create, are stopping what is already crazy and trying to make it even crazier. That has been the storyline. And I wish I could say that storyline has been limited to the New York Times, but it hasn't been. That was actually a storyline picked up by a lot of conservatives, to be completely blunt with you. I was listening yesterday, in fact, to someone who is a well-known radio show host who actually is a friend of mine and a very good person, I will say, and a very smart person. And this person, caught up in the moment, as so many do get caught up in the moment, was saying in no uncertain terms that any Republican in the House of Representatives who refused to vote for the Boehner Plan was basically deserting in the middle of battle, was AWOL at the moment of crisis. basically was a Quisling, was committing treason against the Republican Party. By the way, this is not, again, I can't even overstate, this is not a dumb person, this is a smart person and a nuanced person. But this person said this without any irony or shame at all, that if you weren't voting for this, you had committed a moral crime. Now, a lot of Republicans feel that way, and that, of course, is a view that the Republican leadership was behind as well. Do our bidding or else there's something very, very wrong with you. Lost in this was the actual substance of the Boehner bill. And I don't want to lecture, but let me just tell you a couple of things which you may or may not have seen in newspapers. 2 weeks ago, Standard & Poor's, one of the rating agencies, and we can debate how many people who work at rating agencies ought to be in prison right now, probably a lot. Nevertheless, an important component of the American economic system, Standard & Poor's announced, look, here's the bottom line. The United States government has a AAA bond rating for its debt, and we are going to downgrade you to AA unless $4 trillion is cut from the debt immediately. $4 trillion. It's really clear. Cut $4 trillion or we're downgrading you. Now, it seems to me this was a pivot point in recent American history. The United States government's bond rating is not a small thing. It's one of the foundations upon which our economic security and certainly the perception of American economic strength is built. The rest of the world looks on at America and says, we may like them, we may not like them. They pay their debts, period, and that's why they've got a AAA rating. Once the United States loses that, something profound is lost. There is no law of nature that says the United States needs to be the preeminent country in the world. That preeminence is built on our economic strength, and that economic strength is built to some large extent on the perception of its strength. And the second the rest of the world looks on and says, actually, that country's not as strong as we thought it was, something very serious has been lost. And in mathematical terms, it's also significant because guess what? When your bond rating goes down, there are certain funds that aren't allowed to invest, aren't allowed to buy your debt. And by the way, it's entirely possible that the cost of borrowing money, not just for the US government, but for individuals in the United States, goes up. That means every car loan, every home mortgage, every line of credit, every time you borrow money, it costs more once you're downgraded. Economists have estimated as of yesterday that this, in the first year, were we to go to AA, would cost American consumers $100 billion in the first year. Contrast that against the proposed savings of the Boehner plan, which are about $20 billion in the first year. So this would cost more than about 5 times the stated savings, as scored by the CBO, of this plan. That's a good deal? That's, as they say, a good starting point? Really? So here's the bottom line. You have the leadership of both parties, and one party, this is to be expected because I think they're completely irresponsible. And what else would you expect? They don't care if they don't understand math. But the party that was elected to be stewards of the economy, in fact, elected on a platform that was pretty explicit, don't spend more than you take in. That party has, at its highest level, accepted the inevitability of a downgrade of our rating. Now, in Washington, I brought this up a couple times at dinner and lunch, and the response is always saying, well, yeah, I mean, of course, it's going to happen. Really? And that's okay? Isn't this exactly the reason that, like, most of us kind of trooped to the polls 8 months ago and sort of punched the R ticket? So this wouldn't happen? Where is the outcry? It doesn't exist. And look, I understand that there's a similarly, maybe equally, maybe more compelling argument to be made on a relative basis. You got to pick one. This one's better than the other. Go ahead and pick it. But that's a real argument. I'm not dismissing it. I'm actually not a complete lunatic. I haven't actually moved to Idaho yet. But there is also, it seems to me, an argument based in principle that's at least equally worth making, and no one's making it. 22 Republicans voted against that bill yesterday. 22. And trust me, they're going to pay for it. Some of them are going to lose their seats. At least one, Jim Jordan of Missouri, already been informed by leadership. You're getting districted out. You're losing your district for this. That's the response. Now look, I don't want to whine, but let me just make a really simple and very, very clear point. There is a cost to partisanship. Partisanship is very different from principle. Partisanship is the idea that you do what guys on your team say you should do because you're always on the same team. Sometimes that tracks with the principled move. Often it does. Sometimes it doesn't. And the role of conservatives, that is people who hold ideas more important than individuals, whose loyalty is to a belief rather than to a set of leaders, it falls to them to stand up and say, whoa, hold on a second here. Because when they don't, there are no watchdogs. There's no press watching this. There's not one person in the conventional media who cares at all. At all. There's no one watching out. The only people watching out are conservative activists. And when they decide that casting their ballot, electing Republicans, is kind of the end of their duty, then it's over. That's how you wind up with a prescription drug program, because nobody's watching. And the feeling among a lot of very sweet, very, in my view, well-motivated Republicans is, I don't want to be too pushy, and I kind of owe the Republican Party something. Oh, really? No, they owe you, because you vote for them. So hold them accountable. So it seems to me, and I'm not a professional advocate, I'm like a hack journalist, so it's an odd role for me. I've just been ruminating about this for the past 24 hours. It's an odd role for me to advocate greater activism, but even if I were liberal, I would feel this way, just on justice grounds, just on fairness grounds, that the people who send money to foundations in Washington, who elect Republicans and send them to Washington, all in the hope that this country is going to become more conservative, would at some point look back and consider the data. Are there fewer abortions than there were 20 years ago? Is the divorce rate lower or higher? Are there more children born outside of wedlock than there were? How's the economy doing? Are we deeper in debt? What's the unemployment rate like? What are the results, in other words? What happened to all those votes? Where is all that money? Well, I actually happen to know because a lot of them sit next to me at lunch. They're there when I get there and they're there when I leave, and they're drinking. Some of that money's wasted. I'm just sorry. I'm sorry to tell you that, but I live there, so I can say that with great authority. And it seems to me that before you cast that vote, and before especially you write that check, make sure that the people to whom you're sending the money or the people for whom you're voting are going to get actual results, and hold them to it. Don't let them use you. Don't let them write you off as rubes, because that's what's happening now. I'm sorry to say that. So with that, I will stop and take your hostile questions, some of them deserved. Thank you very much. Yes, ma'am. Well, the question was, how does the average person who doesn't live in D.C. and who has like a real life and children and like goes to church and like is a whole person and not just a freak, learn the details of what is actually happening? How do you get past all the horse race nonsense? That's not nonsense, but it's not profoundly significant in the end. How do you find out the details? And I would say that obviously your first stop would be the Daily Caller, if I can say. But I would also say the substance actually is available online. It does take a little digging, actually. Read the bill, I guess, would be my view. And more than anything, remember. It's memory that holds people accountable. Wait a second. Didn't I vote for this person on the promise that he wasn't going to raise the debt ceiling? But wait, he just voted to do so. Like, how did that happen? Wait, remember what people said. It's like that scene in Animal Farm, really the most brilliant political book ever written, where all the dumb animals kind of trot out into the courtyard in the morning and they see that all the slogans on the barn have been erased and repainted. Where it was all animals are created equal, it was some animals are more equal than others. Huh? When did that happen? And all the kind of, the rabbits kind of look over at the horses and are like, did that change? I don't think so. Yeah, don't be the horse, I guess. Remember what the promises were. Remember what the metrics were. Vote for me and we'll overturn Obamacare. Okay, well look, let's be real. This stuff is very complex. It's very difficult to overturn a piece of legislation when the guy in the White House holding the veto pen, is the force behind that legislation. I get all that, but people who run on the promise to overturn Obamacare ought to at least be expected to wake up every morning thinking of new ways to overturn Obamacare. They shouldn't give up within 3 weeks. And by the way, they did. And by the way, not even that. They never even meant it. Trust me, I know them. They didn't mean it. We're going to overturn Obamacare. Really? I'd run, how exactly are you going to do that? Well, we're going to get right on that. We are. We're going to get right on that because the American people want that. But how are you going to do it? Well, we're just going to get moving on that. And they didn't. Not surprisingly. What bothers me though is that nobody remembers that. How many people stand up in a town hall meeting and say, "I'm sorry, Congressman so and so, Senator so and so, you said you were going to overturn Obamacare. Like, what have you done this week to do that?" They need to be held accountable. And I know the whole idea behind the Tea Party was this was going to be a permanent force to hold American politicians accountable. And I think it's done a lot of really positive things. I'm very impressed. But look, the nature of these things is people are really busy. They are. And the Tea Party is 99.9% unpaid volunteers who are doing this only because they care. And, over time, the energy tends to dissipate, not just with the Tea Party, but with any movement. I mean, that's just life, as you know. And without them, there's literally nobody. And I personally think the answer is more media outlets, non-liberal media outlets. I don't mean Republican Party outlets. My gosh, we don't need any more of those. But I mean outlets that don't see the world through this distorted prism that 99% of reporters do. They've never met anybody who goes to church or believes abortion's wrong or owns a gun. It's just like this tiny little sweaty world they live in with, air never gets in. I think people from the rest of America who at this point are off like building businesses and, doing normal adult things, some of them ought to get together and say, you know what, we're going to start our own newspaper. It's not going to toe the Republican Party line, but it's going to kind of tell the truth, actually. How's that for an innovation? I think that's the answer. I'm biased. Any other questions? Yes, sir. Some of them do. Some of them do, but the culture fights against it. I mean, you heard Senator Santorum say this last night. I was actually shocked to hear Senator Santorum, who I think of as the most articulate defender of human life ever in my lifetime to serve in the United States Senate. I always admired his speeches. I was amazed to hear him say last night that for his entire tenure in the House and his first term in the Senate, he didn't use the word abortion on the floor. I had no idea. So take it from him. The pressure to sort of be polite and obey is profound. And the leadership, I don't even need to tell you how, especially if you're, an evangelical or you're pro-life, or, the Democratic Party, truly hates you. It's organized its entire existence around just blotting you out. But what is a little bit shocking to me is there is some contempt, frankly, from the higher echelons and the high-level donor base in the Republican Party for people of faith. There is. It's like, we don't want to hear about that stuff. It's icky. And in the end, it's just a lot easier to make a deal. It is. It's just a lot easier to make a deal. The single most significant element of the Republican donor base is obviously business. And there are a lot of people in business who are committed free market folks, and I admire them. But there are a lot who are not committed free market people. Just because you own a business doesn't mean you're for the market. A lot of them are for using government power to crush their competitors, right? That's like basically what Washington is about. People coming up to the capital city with their carve-outs or their different issues on which they're lobbying, and the point of those issues almost always is to help them and hurt their competitors. That's not the market. That's not conservative at all. But that's the single biggest element of the donor base. And their view always is, and you've seen it on television, if you watch CNBC and you've read about it in the paper, in the past couple of weeks, it's like, look, just make a deal. It doesn't matter what the deal is. And there's an enormous amount of pressure on members to do just that. And it seems to me the role of conservatives is, a people of principle, libertarians or classical liberals, whatever you want to call them, people who care about the ideas, who want to see government less intrusive and less large, and fear the consequences of the direction we're moving. Their role is to say, look, the deal isn't the point. The outcome is the point. Yes, ma'am. Why are they talking about cutting instead of freezing the budget? I actually think there isn't enough talk about cutting or freezing the budget, as far as I can tell. Look, this is a highly complex issue on the one hand. It's also pretty simple on the other. Look at the pie chart, all right? You know what the largest drivers of the debt and hence the deficit and hence the debt are, right? They are in order: Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, Pentagon spending, interest on the debt. So like all the things that we spend our lives arguing about, crop subsidies, which I'm adamantly against, but whatever, that's because I'm a nutcase and I care about stuff like that. But in truth, meaningless. Foreign aid, meaningless. I'm annoyed by foreign aid too, like every other right-winger, right? Meaningless. The reason we're in debt is because the American middle class is getting welfare. That's the truth. And no one wants to say that. And by the way, that's the reason it's really hard to cut it. It's really easy. That's why, I was impressed by welfare reform. I think it was a monumental achievement. I take nothing away from its architects or authors. But in the end, take 3 steps back, not so hard to cut programs that benefit a small minority of people, relatively speaking. Yeah, they're voters, but they're not the preponderance of voters. Most people benefit from Medicare. Everybody has some relative who benefits from Medicare. Medicare is, how many Tea Party members are really for slashing Medicare? I'm sure, amen. But it's just a tough nut. This stuff is expensive, not because people hate it, but because they like it. And the key misunderstanding that libertarians especially, and I like libertarians, I know that probably a lot of you don't like them. I kind of do like them. I think they're interesting and I like them. But if I could say there's one thing wrong with libertarians, and a lot of conservatives too, is they don't understand human nature. They think that the one thing that people want is freedom. That's false. I've been to a lot of countries. I've covered a lot of stories. And the one thing I've learned, people like freedom. Yeah, of course they do. They want security. A lot of people will trade freedom for security. Have you been through an airport recently? Exhibit A. I'm not kidding. And libertarians and conservatives, I'm not attacking anyone. I'm just noting what is obvious. And conservatives convince themselves that's not true. And if only people had freedom. No. People want to not worry about the future. A. B. They like free stuff. They just do. Doesn't mean they're evil. It means they're human. If you're walking down the street, there's a $100 bill on the ground, what's your first instinct? Who lost this so that I might return it? Or is it, yes! Unless you're like Mother Teresa, my wife, you're in a very small group of sainted people, some of whom are likely in this room, most of us, we're in the latter category. And that's a revealing response. Deeply revealing of human nature itself. And so when you're arguing, this is why the Democrats pushed through Obamacare, as was noted last night. This is why, in the end, they know they're going to win, because their arguments are consistent with human nature. Give people free stuff. I think it's corrosive of the human condition. I'm not arguing, I think it's a disaster. It infantilizes people. It strips them of their dignity. It's disgusting. But it works. And the reason it works is because it meets people's perceived need. And so conservatives have a much higher bar. They have to make an intellectual case to people, hey, forego something you like. That's really hard. And a lot of them don't even want to bother, so they throw these slogans out. Spare me. Make the case. Make the ideological case. Win people over through their heads. That's the only way you can do it. Anyway, last question. Yes, ma'am. So the question is, if we don't cut Medicare, if we don't get entitlement spending, and it really is about entitlement spending. I mean, this is not one crackpot's opinion. Just look at the math. What do we do? Apart from move to New Zealand, which also has socialized medicine, by the way, just so you know, I checked. I'll be totally honest with you. I mean, do you want to know what I really think? I think that there are some long-term demographic trends that are going to be very difficult for the Republican Party as currently constituted to overcome, to be totally blunt with you. I really do. I think it's got a couple more presidential cycles of potential wins, and that's it. And there are many, many different demographic factors, but I'll just name 2. One is immigration. The overwhelming majority of first-time immigrant voters vote Democrat. That could change. I'm just saying as presently constituted. But right now, the overwhelming majority vote Democrat. There are a lot of reasons for that. It's a whole separate conversation. I won't bore you, but it's just true and checkable. That's a huge problem. I mean, I know that conservatives are upset about immigration. I don't think most conservatives understand just how quickly the country is changing. They don't. And I'm sure it's a mixed bag. Everything in life is. I'm sure it's changing in some ways for the better. It's definitely changing in some ways for the worse. And for the Republican Party, it's a disaster. The second demographic change that no one ever mentions, but is almost as profound, is the marriage rate. For the first time in human history that I am aware of, in the United States and, by the way, Western Europe, there are more adult unmarried women than adult married women. Now, there are a lot of reasons for this, and I'm not a social scientist. I don't pretend to know them. I have a lot of theories. I won't bore you with them. But I know a lot about politics, and I will tell you the political ramifications of that are completely obvious. Married women with kids vote Republican. Unmarried women without them vote Democrat. Not always, not in every case, generally, overwhelmingly. Okay? So if you have a growth curve that looks like that of unmarried adult women, that's a growth curve of Democratic voters. And it's accelerating. So that's a huge, huge problem. There's a tipping point, and I'm not exactly sure where it is, where you wind up with a country where most people are getting more than they're putting in. We're almost there. I think we're at about 50%. Another way of thinking about that is 50% of the population has no skin in the game, actually. I don't know what happens then. I don't know. I guess my default sort of stupid answer, but one that I believe with all my heart, raise decent children. Because that's really, in the end, kind of all you can do. Thank you. I'm sorry that was depressing. I really appreciate it.
Tucker Carlson. Thank you, Tucker. There's a million reasons to be for marriage. You just heard number 1,000,001. There's votes in it, too. You should have seen Carlson before he went off caffeine if you thought that that was lively. Tucker, thank you for controlling your time. I knew you could do it not only because you've been trained in cable television, but because you were on Dancing with the Stars once upon a time. Those were the days. We're really grateful that 710 KNUS and the Daily Caller have both contributed hugely to helping us meet our budget for Western Conservative Summit 2011, and consequently they are officially our two presenting sponsors of the summit. Do stop by the Daily Caller table in the exhibit area. Take advantage of getting to know Tucker. Doesn't he seem like the kind of guy that you could greatly enjoy knowing just as a casual friend as well as a keen observer of Washington and America?